Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today's video is a continuation called Does Hashem Have Emotions Like a Human Being? Part 2. Now, you'll remember in the previous video, I dealt with an explanation from a site that basically is one of the universities in America um, that basically deals with the issue of what is psychologically and physiologically to be considered the definitions of emotions. I won't go back through every single point that's made here, but one of the things I will point out is something that it mentions in the defining emotions section, where it talks about emotions are often confused with feelings and moods, but the three terms are not interchangeable. According to the American Psychological Association, APA, emotion is defined as a complex reaction pattern involving experiential, behavioral, and psychological elements. Emotions are how individuals deal with matters or situations they find personally significant. Emotional experiences have three components: a subjective experience, a physiological response, and a behavioral or expressive response. So this is important going forward in terms of the definitions that will be used in this video. Um, and again, you can go back to the previous video and read the exact definitions, or even go to this website, that deals with it from, the psychological perspective of it. But again, this is important when we deal with the issue of questioning whether or not the source for creation, meaning what created the universe, has emotions like a human being. So also going back to something that I presented in the previous videos, one of the main aspects of Torah Moshe is the fact that Hashem, the source of creation, created everything. Everything in reality was created by Hashem, whether that be time, the ability for there to be time, the concept of time, everything that happens on the natural level in terms of how the universe works, all the mechanics of the universe, as well as what the possibilities are. So for example, if I as a human being have only the possibility to be a human being and I don't have the ability to become a horse, then of course that was already programmed into the system. If I as a human being have the ability to, let's say, develop myself and become like, let's say, president of a certain country, well, then the possibility is already there. But there's only certain possibilities that are available to me, depending on when I was born, how I was born, what physiological, psychological, things I have as in my toolkit. And there's a saying that basically is mentioned by Chazal, by the rabbis, that basically mentions that there's three factors involved in a person's birth and development, at least the start of it, and then how it continues. And that's basically your parents that give you the physical element that comes from them, and then the creator of all things who gives every other aspect. And then it's up to you to use those tools, if you will, to determine what possibilities you're going to take in life. So one of the first things I'm going to address in this video is the question of, does Hashem change? Does the source of creation change? Now, what's mentioned here is, if you look in the in English it's called the Book of Exodus, but in Hebrew it's called Shemot. In Shemot, what happens is, to kind of cut to the chase, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was essentially approached by the Creator of all things, and he was told that he was supposed to go back to the land of Mitzrayim that he had escaped from, and basically, to go to the leader of that country, Paro, and essentially tell him that the people of Israel have to leave and essentially do the will of Hashem. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked, okay, well, if somebody asked me like who sent me, who am I to say all this stuff? One of the titles he's given is what's called in Hebrew Eya Asher Eya. And essentially the way it's explained in a number of sources is that if you were to, like, let's say, literally translate this, you could come up with something that says, I will be what I will be. But the question is, what exactly does that mean? So a number of Jewish sources, Torah Moshe sources, basically address this and say that what Moshe Rabbeinu was being told is that the creator of all things is beyond time. And what do I mean by that? Meaning that the people of Israel, the creator of all things was with them before, before the enslavement in Egypt happened, and the creator of is currently with them, and that he would be with them in the future. Meaning that this is an expression that, okay, no matter what circumstances happen, at any point in time, the creator of all things is present, and is also present for the people who will receive the Torah. So this is an important point to make. And again, it's all derived from this one statement, that the creator of all things is beyond time. And this is, agreed upon by a number of sources. So for example, before the creator of all things created the universe, the creator of all things was still existent in the present that we live in now, in the future that will be, and in every element of human history, if you will. So this is one of the things that's important to ask the question of if there's a being that's not affected by time. And again, if we're so small in the universe compared to this being that created everything and has nothing that created it, nothing that dictates to it what to do, then does it from the creator's perspective? Is the creator changing? For example, and we'll just address what that means in just a bit. So, in order to further address this, there's another section of the Torah called Bereshit, Perek Wob, and that would be in English Genesis chapter 6, and it deals with the issue of when the Creator of all things decided that there would be what's called a mabul in Hebrew. In English, you call it a flood, but the word mabul means more than flood. It means like a decay, and flood is just a part of that, for example. But one of the things that's mentioned is that in a sense, I think it's almost like in the English the way it's translated is when it says "V'yanachem Hashem." That basically Hashem kind of like relented or regretted creating humanity. So the question is, well, what exactly does that mean? If the Creator, you know, did the Creator already know that the people who were destroying the planet were going to be doing that, and that there would be a need for a flood beforehand, or did He just kind of come to that conclusion like as if He was playing golf somewhere, and then showed up and looked and said, they're messing everything up, time to have a flood? And essentially, what Rabbi Ibn Ezra, one of the things he mentions is Yodua ki lo adam hu lehenachem rak dibra Torah ki leshon bnei adam. So he says that the Torah is talking in the language of people, meaning that if we were to try to understand on Hashem's level what was going on, it's way above us. So the Torah has to speak in a language that people use. So people use the term of regret. Does the Creator of all things regret something? Of course not, because the Creator of all things is beyond time, just as we talked about. The Creator of all things, wasn't lost on the idea that humanity would take a certain path. But the Creator of all things has reasons why, things are done at a certain time and why things are not done at a certain time. And basically, what the Rabbi Ibn Ezra explains about this particular part um, is that essentially the Creator of all things, is not a person. The Torah is just using the language of men to discuss this issue, because if it wasn't, there'd be nothing to really discuss. We would have this metaphysical text, as I say constantly, that nobody would be able to understand, or the majority of people would never understand it. So another commentary on this particular section comes from the Kli Yakar. And one of the things that's mentioned in the Kli Yakar is, about this issue, about the Creator of all things being way beyond humanity, if you will. And essentially that the thoughts of Hashem, which is also mentioned in Yeshayahu, the thoughts of Hashem are beyond the thoughts of humanity, that they're not, we don't think the way the Creator thinks. And again, how could we? I've never created a universe, so of course I can't think like something that created a universe. And even the concept of thinking, is something that's only something we relate to on a human level. Something that's beyond us could even say, well, you're not thinking based on this level over here. So if you were to say, okay, well, let's say as an example, it's proven that the sun is thinking. Well, the thought of a person compared to the sun would be nothing then. I mean, you could even say, well, we're not even thinking, because we're not even anywhere near the level of something like that. So that's one of the things that's mentioned in Kli Yakar, that the Creator of all things is beyond humanity, and that this issue of trying to understand certain things, you have to just accept that this is the language of men, and this is what we have to understand, and this is what the Creator gave us, to understand it, and gave us the ability to be able to move forward. But we can't get like drowned in this idea of trying to say, well, what exactly does Hashem think at any given moment? Because again, we're not at that level to even say at any given moment, for example, or even how thoughts work, at that level. And we just have to accept that that's way above and beyond our pay grade, if you will. And the same is also mentioned in the commentary Ora Chaim, um, that essentially the Creator of all things sees all time, across time. So, for example, before the Creator of all things created the universe, the Creator of all things knew what choices humanity would make. But the Creator of all things, in order to benefit humanity, allows us to make those choices for ourselves rather than dictating them, and rather than forcing us to make certain choices or stopping us from making certain choices. The Creator of all things has programmed reality to act in a way that, for example, those who are doing the will of Hashem, which we'll see later is described in another text, are able to succeed within that reality. But those who don't are able to either get the good all in this reality and in this world, rather than the world to come. And those who are able to do things in a way that the Torah commands, the way Hashem commanded, are able in some cases to have the good in this world and in the next world, or in some cases to have everything good in the next world, and then have challenges in this world. So this is, another commentary that deals with this idea that Hashem doesn't change. Hashem sees all the future, and again, seeing, again, this is one of the issues that is brought up, like I think by Rabbi Hirsch, for example, where he says, okay, look, this is all a philosophical discussion, about whether Hashem has emotions or not. It's like saying we can say that Hashem cares about us, but we can only say that based on the things that we see in reality working towards us, not because we're up there and we can see what emotions are like, And again, emotions are an English word. So we can't really take an English word that is not a Hebrew word and not something found in the Torah and then try to express it and place it upon something that's way above us and beyond us. So one of the things we find in the Talmud, in Masechet Baruchot, Perek Aleph, and this is Daf He Aleph in the Gemara, is that basically what it says here is that it says Bara'eh Shelo Kamidot HaKadosh Baruch Hu Midat Basar V'Dam Midot Basar V'Dam Muchar Chefetz V'Chabiro Muchar Etzev ולוקח שמח אבל הקדוש ברוך הוא אינו כן נתן להם תורה לישראל ושמח ושנאמר כי לקח טוב נתתי לכם תורתי אל תעזבו. So essentially what this is saying is that the midot, in most cases people would translate midot as characteristics, but I've seen a few cases where someone used emotions, if you will. But when they were describing the emotional side of it, it wasn't like what what English speakers would call emotions. But the characteristics of the midot of Hashem are not like the midot of flesh and blood, meaning humanity. And again, how could they be on this level? Because of the fact that we are dictated by time where the Creator is not, and the Creator created time. So anything that we attest to the Creator is by us looking at reality as it is and saying that there are things in reality that give us the impression that the Creator of all things has emotions like a human being, and this is what the Torah allows us to do within the confines of the Torah. So anything that's not in the Torah, we can't place that on Hashem. So let's say the Torah doesn't say that Hashem is afraid, like I mentioned in the previous video. We can't say Hashem is afraid of anything, because again, why would the Creator of all things be afraid of anything? There's no reason if this is the source of creation, and that there's nothing dictating to the source of creation what to do, how to do it, things like that. There'd be no reason to have fear. So if we take away things that we consider to be emotions in English and say, well, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that, well, then it's nothing like a human thing, because as a human being, we do have fear. We can overcome fear, but we still have fear. So the next thing that is mentioned is if you look in Rabbi Saadia Gaon's commentary as well as translation of the Torah into Judeo-Arabic, which I pulled out of this particular Chumash, which is a Yemenite Taj. Now, concerning Rav Saadia Gaon's translation, in order to understand this is of course in the Hebrew. What you see here in the green is the actual Hebrew text of Parashat Balak. It deals with the point where the false prophet Navi, the Bilam, basically is explaining to Balak, this nevuah, this prophecy that he has about the people of Israel. And the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, basically explains that at this one point, Hashem gave Bilam the ability to be a Navi, for this one moment, in order to say good things about the people of Israel. And one of the things he mentions about Hashem is he says, Lo ish el uchazev uven adam v'yithnachom w'hahu omar v'lo ya'aseh v'diber lo yagemanu. So what this translates into is like that Hashem is not a man that he would relent, for example, or that what he would do, and that he would say something and not like establish it. So essentially what this means is that this is one of the proofs that's given by a number of the Rishonim, that Hashem doesn't change, because people can change their minds and say one thing and do another thing at any moment, for example, but Hashem doesn't do that. If Hashem establishes something, which we know the Torah is what Hashem establishes, for example, it'll have to come to pass, because that's the way Hashem operates. Hashem has no reason to change based on the model we saw earlier about how Hashem operates outside of time and sees or is involved in all aspects of time at the same time using a human model, and sees all time at the same time, if you will, again, using a human model of seeing. But one of the things I wanted to concentrate on, because I was challenged on this once by someone who was trying to say that that's not what this pasuk is saying, is that if you look at Rav Saadia Gaon's commentary on this in Arabic, it basically says exactly what it says there, and also the Targum, the Aramaic translation, also says the same thing about this, that Hashem is not like a man, and explains this as one of the reasons why. So what you see here is a close-up On the right side, for example, and this is again dealing with Parashat Belak in Sefer Bimidbar, or in Numbers, as I think it's called in English, in chapter 23, and this would be like verse like 19. So essentially, what the Aramaic translation says is it amplifies this idea that Hashem is not like flesh and blood, like a human being. That Hashem doesn't change. In terms of Hashem establishes something to be the case, it's going to be the case. Now, one of the things that I think confuses people about this idea is that they don't take the entire Torah as a whole to understand what that means. So, for example, if Hashem were to like state somewhere that in order to, for example, succeed at a certain thing, then a person has to do a certain set things, a certain group of things at a certain time in the right way. If Hashem establishes that, then that has to happen. But if Hashem also says, okay, well, if you choose not to do those things the right way, and if you choose to follow the wrong path, here's what could happen on the wrong path. Now those things don't have to happen unless a person just pushes all the way through and forces them to happen. It would basically take a person forcing them to happen. At the same time, if Hashem, for example, said, okay, if you make a mistake and you make a return and, for example, correct the mistake, then these things will happen because of the correction. Then that has to happen if the person takes that path. But if Hashem says, if you choose not to correct the mistake, and this is the path you continue to follow, until the end, then that's what has to happen. So the whole thing is that you have to take the entire proportion of the Torah and say that this, gives us all we need to know about the character of Hashem. That Hashem will never leave us in a situation where we can't, do the will of Hashem. There's always the option. And one of the commentaries I'll show later talks about this at one point, that this is the reason the Torah was even given, so that people could succeed at like the life that Hashem wants them to have. But essentially, at the same time, the Torah has warnings in it about don't take that path, or these things will happen, and none of those things have to happen unless, people decide this is the route I'm going to go. And this is the thing that is being talked about here, that if Hashem says, that if you're doing the right thing, these things happen in this world, or these things happen in the Olam Haba, then that's established. It'll have to happen. If Hashem, establishes that, okay, if you do these things, this will be the thing that'll happen because of that, that behavior. And if you don't correct it by a certain point or correct it in a certain way, this is what's definitely going to happen. Then that's what, can happen, but it's up to the person. A person can decide I'm not going to take that path, or I'm going to, get back on the right path. And there, it's like saying there are consequences to all things. And Hashem established how the consequences work, positive or negative. So looking at the commentary of the Baal Shem Tov, because of this discussion I was having with someone, I decided to look at the Baal Shem Tov, since they were, someone who kind of follows the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And one of the things I found was interesting is that, similar to what the Rambam says about Hashem, and similar to what the Rambam uses as a proof, the Baal Shem Tov's explanation here, where it says, Harehu Yitbarach Shemo, Einu Ba'al Shinuim, Al Yedei Dichtiv, Malachi, Gimel Vav, Pasuk Vav, Ani Hashem lo sheniti. So one of the things I brought up was the Rambam mentioned something like this. A number of Rishonim mentions this, that Hashem does not change, and the Baal Shem Tov says the same thing, that Hashem is not, a Baal Shinuim. And he quotes like Malachi, 3:6, to be able to say this, where it says, I am Hashem, I didn't change. So essentially Hashem doesn't change. This is something that, the Baal Shem Tov even teaches, or even taught, I should say. Continuing in, and again, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this earlier, but this is from the commentary of the Torah that's attributed to the Baal Shem Tov. Now, one of the next things as mentioned is, because what he was basically talking about was this kind of, dichotomy of like, of questions that existed amongst the Rishonim about, some of these issues about like, exactly, how do these things work when it comes to Hashem, and essentially what he mentions is that, one of the things that, Hashem does not, is not like a human being, like flesh and blood, if you will, basar v'dam. Hashem doesn't work the way humans do. There are things that humans do that, for example, are based on knowledge that we don't previously have. So, for example, we're not born already knowing everything, if you will. We're not born even knowing most of what we even need to use in life. We develop those things. Hashem doesn't have reason to develop anything. Hashem already knows everything that exists because Hashem created reality. He also mentions that Hashem doesn't lack anything. He says, so Hashem doesn't lack anything. Hashem already knows everything, and Hashem doesn't have to develop a knowledge of what will happen and what must happen. So continuing, in the Baal Shem Tov's commentary, what it mentions here is, the ratzon, the will of Hashem and Hashem are exactly one and the same, are interconnected. So Hashem doesn't change something out of the blue, for example. If Hashem establishes something, it's when Hashem wants it to be established and not before or not after. So for example, someone could ask the question, and this is what he's mentioning about the question that Rishonim had, well, why didn't Hashem create the universe and everything before a certain point? It's because at the time that Hashem created it, that's the time that Hashem wanted it to be created, and that's the time that it needed to be created because Hashem wanted it to be that way. There's no other way around it. There's nothing that put Hashem on the clock to say that I have to create something now or later. It's in order for reality to be what is good for humanity. Hashem created everything at a certain time, and that's one of the things that's mentioned here is that the ratzon of Hashem, the will of Hashem, is this aspect of Hashem, is part of Hashem, is Hashem, and that there's no separation, and that Hashem does things upon the times that Hashem is determined that they will be established for the benefit. So to start to wind this down a bit, again, remember, if we want to take this in proportion, Hashem created all aspects of time, past, present, and future, and is thus involved in all aspects of time, past, present, and future at the same time, from our perspective as humans. Because of the fact that we're so small within reality, that's a hard concept for us to swallow because of the fact that we don't exist that way. We're very time-based. At some point I'm born, I live, and then I die, whatever time frame that's going to happen in. But Hashem is beyond all of that. So for example, when I was born, Hashem was already there at the same time that I am right now, and at the same time it'll be for me in the future, as well as future generations. That the same point when Hashem gave the Torah to Am Yisrael in the past, he gave it to every Jew in the future who would ever accept it. Whether born into the Jewish nation or who would convert to the Jewish nation. Hashem was already involved in all this, for example, back before Hashem created everything. And, again, this is an aspect of like this whole theory of like space-time that goes beyond humanity, but again, Hashem is beyond time, so there's no reason for Hashem to have changed because time is the only thing that's been progressing. Hashem doesn't progress through time. Hashem is above time. So the Hashem of the past is the Hashem of the present and the Hashem of the future. That's one of the things that's mentioned in Hebrew text, but it's written in the language of men. Because again, if something's beyond time, there's no reason to change. From our perspective, it looks like the weather's changing, things in space are changing. All kind of things look like they're changing, and they are from the universe's perspective. But in terms of the source of creation that created the universe, it isn't. So this goes back to what I mentioned in the previous video that someone had asked, mentioned at one point, well, does that make Hashem just some huge robot, or AI? And as I mentioned before, that doesn't make any sense because we created robots, we created AI. If anything, because Hashem created us, it's like saying we're the robots, we're the AI. So this is my next video, and on the next video I'll be going into a little bit more detail in a few other areas from some other sources. So I hope this helps. Take care. This is Ahav Ever from the Chronicles of Ahav Ever. Thank you and bye.